Over the past several years, we've certainly seen our fair share of bad comic book movies, and typically the process always goes the same way. They put out something that everybody mocks, that everyone ridicules, that everyone thinks is terrible, and instead of accepting the blame, accepting the failure, the studio, the directors, the producers, the actors and actresses involved, they all decide to point the finger at the fans. What we're not used to seeing is the complete opposite. When some of the actors involved with something that ends up being a complete and total catastrophe at the box office decide to say, you know what? The audience is pretty smart. You know who's stupid? The studio that made this piece of shit movie. But that's exactly what Dakota Johnson did with Madam Web. Madam Web was a catastrophe, not just when it comes to reviews, but also at the box office. But instead of seeing the normal cycle, it's been a little bit different. Sydney Sweeney out there on Saturday Night Live making fun of her own movie. And then Dakota Johnson very specifically slamming the studio and saying, you know what? Audiences are a lot smarter than these people in the studios think they are. And I'm not surprised that this thing is getting torn to shreds. Well, apparently and predictably, the very studio that she's criticizing, Sony, has a problem with what she came out there and said. Sony is reportedly angry at Dakota Johnson for dragging Madam Web and failing to take any responsibility after admitting she hadn't seen the film herself. And let's get to this thing. Rumor, Sony Pictures not happy with Madam Web star Dakota Johnson following recent interviews. And of course, I'm going to read this to you. This is the interview that really apparently was over the line when she decided to have fans back and blame the studio and blame the way that they're making movies right now in the entertainment industry on the massive failure of this movie. It started when she said she wasn't surprised by the bad reviews that were coming out. It's so hard to get movies made, and in these big movies that get made, it's even starting to happen with the little ones, which is really freaking me out. Decisions are being made by committees, and art does not do well when it's made by committee. Films are made by a filmmaker and a team of artists around them. You can't make art based on numbers and algorithms. My feeling has been for a long time that audiences are extremely smart and executives have started to believe they're not. Audiences will always be able to sniff out bullshit. Even if films start to be made with AI, humans aren't going to fucking want to see those. But it was definitely an experience for me to make the movie. I'd never done anything like it before. I probably will never do anything like it again because I don't make sense in the world. And she would go on to reiterate, but I understand why it's being ripped to shreds. Rumor has it Sony Pictures executives were not pleased about Johnson's comments. Quote, lots of people at Sony are questioning her star power, and how she reacted to this failure will likely come back to haunt her. It's okay to joke about your movie not doing well and even lean into the bad reviews like Sydney Sweeney did on SNL, but producers in Sony aren't laughing over Dakota's continued dragging of how she sees the fallout of Madam Web and how she isn't taking any responsibility for its lackluster results. Not every movie's going to work, but a lot of hard work is put towards even bad movies, and for your star to shit on it is a bad look. Yeah, you know what? It is a bad look. It's a bad look, 100% for the studio, for Dakota Johnson to shit all over the studio in the way that they made this movie. And if you're questioning her star power, well, maybe you should have thought about that before you cast her to be in this movie. You're the ones that wanted her to be in this thing. So I don't really understand how that has anything to do with it. However, I will say this. Despite virtually everyone in the world agreeing that Madam Web is an embarrassment, based off how they've reacted afterwards, I think people have a lot more respect for someone like Sydney Sweeney, who's willing to joke about her movie, and for Dakota Johnson, who's willing to defend the fans, not throw them under the bus, and instead say, you know what? The studios, the way they're making movies right now, it's not a surprise that this thing ended up getting completely changed and totally was an embarrassment. So for sure, there might be some studio heads and executives that get really pissed off that she called them out. Maybe that does affect the job she gets offered. I don't think she really cares about that. But I will say this, I think the fans will remember. I think the audience members will remember Dakota Johnson calling out these studios before it was popular to do so. Because I have a feeling Dakota Johnson's not going to be the last one to come out and talk about how the studios are so completely out of touch. But what do you guys think about this after slamming Sony, slamming the studio, and basically saying, you know what? The audiences are not to blame. It's the studios that are to blame for Madam Web's failure. Looks like Sony's not very happy with her. Let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments section below. Smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later.